Hi, and welcome back to Dogs Do Speak podcast with myself, Colin Spence, and the wonderful Samantha Wayland. Today, we've got an interesting and wonderful, super fantastic guest in the name of Michael Shikashio. So, most of you will know who Michael is. And for those of you that don't, my question is, where have you been? Where do you live? Okay, so in a moment, Michael's going to introduce himself. And today we're going to just talk about aggression, what it isn't, what we can do to help dogs through what you perceive to be an aggression displays, or what else can we do? Can we get into the vets, check for pain, etc., etc., etc.? But I'm going to let Michael lead us into that. So, Michael, without further ado, can you just introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. Thanks so much, Colin and Sam. I'm excited to be on this show. Yeah, it's a little bit about me. I've kind of been training for dogs for about 25 years and started out in rescue and foster, and that's how I caught the behavior bug. I just started getting, they start sending you easy dogs at first, like, you want to foster? I'm like, sure. And then, I wasn't doing any kind of dog training at the time, but you start getting more into it, and I started getting more fosters, and I had about 100 foster dogs come through my home through a few years' time when I was much younger. And I really got interested in the training and behavior of it because I recognized that one of the most common reasons for dogs to be given up on or surrendered to shelters or face worse outcomes is because of behavior. So I thought, what better way to help these dogs that I'm fostering, other than to just foster them, to also think about training and behavior. And I also recognize many of those dogs as they start to send you more and more difficult dogs because they know you're the experienced foster home. And I noticed one of the issues was aggression issues. So that's where I really took a deep dive into learning about training and behavior. And I opened up my own training business, taking on all kinds of cases, house training and loose leash walking and things like that. And eventually started to take on aggression cases. And I really just loved that work because I found that I enjoyed the how much you can see the change in the dogs when you change their world for them. So you change the environment, you change what's happening with the relationships with the people. So I went all in. I started to focus on aggression, and I opened up aggressivedog.com and started really taking on aggression cases. This was before the advent of Zoom, but I was even doing some remote consulting then. And I gotta say, I'm one of the luckiest people, really, because I've had the opportunity now to travel around the world in more than 20 countries and I don't know, a few hundred cities at this point, meeting people, meeting different trainers, meeting dog guardians from around the world, and being able to teach other trainers and help folks just learn about how to work with aggression cases. So, yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm very happy of the opportunities I've been given, and I'm just trying to pay it forward with teaching what I know as best I can.
That's amazing. It's amazing. For those that are watching, Mike can talk about this a little bit towards the end, but the course that Mike does is absolutely amazing. I would say to anyone that if you're into aggression like I am, a bit of an aggression geek, you must do this course. But that can be discussed a little bit later. So, Michael, aggression. What is it? When we use the term where dogs are concerned, what does aggression look like? I know there are many different branches, but can you just give us a just talk to, just walk us through what it looks like?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a great question because it's one of the most confusing labels or terms that are out there. And even if you ask behavior professionals, you can ask two different behavior professionals or trainers, what is aggression? How do you define aggression? You're probably going to get two different answers. Much of it is depending on what their background is and what scientific lenses they look through or what their experiences are and working with, aggression or studying it. And for me, it boils down to behavior. Aggression is behavior, just like running is, right? Because once we take away the loaded aspect of it, meaning it's a term that sounds bad. Oh, like somebody's aggressive or that person's disturbing or spiteful. It just puts these labels on, especially when it's dogs doing normal behavior, what they're doing just to survive or escape something scary or threatening, just like people do. Then it becomes much more understandable. So, really, for me, it's important to look at it as behavior. And it's a suite of behaviors we often consider things like snarling, barking, lunging, growling, snapping, biting behaviors. Those are all behaviors we can generally agree upon what it looks like when a dog is biting, right? Or a
Mhm.
dog is snarling or lunging. Most of us can kind of describe that or think about it in our minds. And it's all behavior. And it's behavior used to increase distance from or eliminate a provocative or threatening stimulus. That's the definition I use because that's the function of the behavior. And so when we think about the function, we start to understand, okay, this is why the dog is doing it, or this is why the person's doing it. Because if I said Colin's a really an aggressive person and Colin goes around punching people in the face, at first glance, you'd be like, "Oh, Colin doesn't sound like a good person." But what happens is, if you get to the understanding, it's behavior. Punching somebody in the face after somebody tried to rob Colin with a gun is
Mhm.
much more understandable. So when we start to look at it with dogs that way, the dog growled at somebody that tried to stick their hand in the food bowl once right after they rescued the dog and the dog was starving and we start looking at the details and the function of the behavior, then it's not so egregious, right? We're like, we don't
Mhm.
have to say that dog's aggressive, oh it's bad, aggressive dog's terrible. It is the dog is doing something that's normal, exhibiting a behavior used in that context with a function that makes perfect sense when you think about it. So that's the message I try to put out in the world. It's just let's look at the behavior and then understand the function and the reasons and the causes behind it. And then it's, you don't have to look at it as bad or good. It's just
Mhm.
behavior.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Finding out why the behaviour is occurring has got to be the first place. Why? Why is it happening? And then delving deep into it. Once we do that, you're right, we can try to understand it better. It's not so alarming anymore. Yeah. Maybe if we change our behaviour, the dog will change his behaviour. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting when you say that. Does the environment play a part in all of this?
I always say the behaviors in the environment because that is, it's so true, especially in aggression cases. They're so contextual, meaning that if you set the stage, you set, the right conditions in place, you're probably going to see the behavior. You're most likely going to see the behavior because just like people, again, if we're in our car and somebody comes up to the window with a gun and we've learned that, what we do, the actions or behaviors we take can eliminate or get distance from that particular threatening stimulus, we're going to remember that. We're going to do that again if that context replays itself. So, same thing for dogs. If they figure out, oh, if I just do this when I feel threatened or unsafe, then it works. And I'm going to keep doing that. So, yeah, it is. It's one of the first things I look at is sort of the scene of the crime, right? And that is looking at the context, the environment, looking at where it happened, because that's going to give me a lot of details on what I need to figure out the assessment aspect of it and determine how to help the dog and the person involved. So, yeah, always look at the environment, look at the context. That's not all of it, of course, but it's a big part of the picture we're painting.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's funny because I got into similar to you. I used to foster a lot of overseas dogs, and I think
Mhm.
we had about 60 in total.
Mm,
And same as you, started off with the nice, nice little easy ones, and then
yeah,
they just got
yeah.
harder and harder and harder as we went through. And I used to really struggle because I'd be like, this dog's perfect here. And then it would go to another home and they'd be like, oh no, we've got this issue and this is happening, it's growling. And I'm like, okay, we'll take him back. And they'd come back and nothing would happen here. And I'm like, I don't understand. And that's why I got into dog training and behavior because I was like, why is it not happening here? And it is happening when they go into other homes. And exactly like you said, it is that environment that of similar to what Colin and I were talking about actually before we came on here, that overstimulating environment. And sometimes people just they can't. It's not that they can't read the dog; they're just not sure that they can, read their dog and have that sort of communication. I think that's a huge thing, especially for rescue dogs.
Yeah. Yes. And we might even look at that as part of the environment, right? So the
Mm.
person not being able to read the dog's signals or communications is really, when you think about it, part of the environment.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that's a really important aspect to focus on is how we as humans communicate with dogs, or are the behaviors we engage in when we see a dog doing X, Y, or Z is so crucial to either avoiding an aggressive response or eliciting an aggressive response in a dog. So now, obviously, there's it takes time, and we spend as trainers many hours observing all the little nuances of dog behavior. So you can't expect the average person to always read the little details that we can read. But there's so much we can do just in general, just to avoid those things, like the simple things like the sayings like let sleeping dogs lie, and don't disturb a dog while they're eating, and really don't pet a dog that doesn't approach you to be pet. It's a good rule of thumb. All those little details that will allow for people not to be experts at reading body language. But I do think it's so important to try to understand what dogs are communicating, because we are part of that environment. And if
Mm.
you put a threat in their environment, they're going to respond accordingly. And most of the time, it's the humans, unfortunately, or other dogs or other animals, but a lot of the times it's the humans that are part of that environment that are not communicating well, or their actions or behaviors they don't realize are aggressive to the dog if the dog was to label what they're doing. So, yeah, it's for me, it's just again building that understanding of what the dog could be experiencing.
That is true, but what about emotional pain
Mhm.
and physical pain? Both are pain in their own way, and both can make us feel tense.
Hmm.
And someone can say the wrong thing, or we perceive it to be the wrong thing, and we can blow up. Would that be the same for dogs?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think again, looking at the big picture of aggression and why it happens, it's so I tell especially trainers that are new to the field is that we get into learning how to get behavior like sit down, stay, walk nicely on a leash, go to a mat, those kind of things. All very important, of course. And that's in the context of getting behavior. When we start looking at aggression cases, though, we move away a little bit from that in terms of how we're going to address the situation, because we have to look at the underlying cause, or what is really why is the dog displaying that behavior in the first place. So it has much less to do with focusing on sit down, stay, and yes, those are important because we can use replacement behaviors, right? We all know about the DRs, the differential reinforcement strategies we can take, or teaching alternative behaviors, or what do you want the dog to do instead? All really important concepts. However, though, with aggression cases, I try to get new trainers, especially, to focus on first, before you think about that, think about what could be happening internally with the dog and how that can affect their behavior. So whether it's fear of Uncle Bob coming through the front door, or frustration because somebody keeps reaching into their food bowl, right? And then that's just the emotional responses we might see. So emotional responses are the behaviors we see as a result of those underlying emotions happening internally, as well as underlying pain, which Colin, you just mentioned, is something else that could be happening, is underlying discomfort, pain. Just like humans or any other animal, it is quite normal to respond aggressively or use an aggressive response if that pain or discomfort is exacerbated or made worse by whoever is in the environment. And it doesn't even have to physically happen. It could be the perception or anticipation of it happening. So anxiety starts to come into the picture. Um, so it's, for me, such a small percentage actually is focused on the sit down, stay kind of stuff. It's so much more. Let's look at the underlying motivation and reason for this. And it's also why, you see like on social media, these challenges, like, let me see you train an aggressive dog. I'm like, why? Right? What, like, because that misses the whole picture. Yes, sure, I can suppress behaviors if I was going to go that route using certain techniques. I could train alternative responses to make it look good. Be like, there's Uncle Bob coming through the front door, and my dog's learned to go run to its mat. Looks great. But is that truly addressing the underlying cause? What if the dog has pain issues? Looks great. He's not biting Uncle Bob. However, he's in pain, and I haven't addressed that. I haven't recognized that by simply focusing on the training. So really that underlying those underlying emotions, the underlying pain or discomfort, the all the other physiological aspects that can impact a dog's behavior, stress, and their response to resiliency. So many of those things are so important that and if we can't always tell, right? We have to be really good at looking at these environmental influences and how it can impact the dog internally, and then making educated guesses on like how we're going to address that. So again, it's not easy because we can't always see it, right? We can see a sit, we can see a down, we can see a dog going to their mat, but it's difficult and that's where professionals come in, right? We help to interpret that for a lot of our clients is saying, okay, your dog is probably in pain here. Like, no, the vet said it's fine, or I don't see anything wrong, or he goes to dog
Chasing the
daycare.
ball up and down the garden. He's
Exactly, right?
fine.
And so our job is to be sort of being the interpreter in a way and say, okay, yes, I can see your observations there. However, I did notice, your dog getting a little bit more slowly up off of that dog bed in this situation, or, so you start to make these observations that can really help the client understand the underlying causes for aggressive responses. So yeah, when you see those training challenges and it's like, let me see you do this with this dog, and it makes absolutely no sense when you think about it. Because yes, we can make it look good on camera for 30 seconds to a minute or 5 minutes or even an hour-long session, but that is such a small sliver of the rest of the dog's life and world and underlying emotions and daily routine and what impacts them, and then the clients as well, and all the multitude of other factors that are involved in how the behavior may go in any certain day, right? I don't even use the word change really. It's more so because how do we know it's really truly changed? We can look at the data and the frequency of the behavior and the intensity of it. But aggression, again, is normal behavior. So for me, it's like saying, can you hold your breath forever? It's a behavior, right? Hold your breath, hold that diaphragm closed. Like that's okay, but how long are you gonna do that for? So for aggressive responses for an animal, humans included, to not defend themselves when they reach a certain level of pain or emotional distress, it's a wrong question to ask, right? So, anyways, long-winded answer to that question, but I was just
No,
going on,
it was it was,
just rolling with some thoughts there.
it wasn't really long-winded because you mentioned so many important
Mm.
things you just said, and one of them being a very problematic influence, in my opinion, for many years now, where we do have those 30-second videos.
Mhm.
Try this, try that, and people absolutely believe it. So their dog who is human aggressive or dog aggressive, they go practice the sit, the down, stays, and all these things, and it doesn't work. And then we're back to square one. Or worse, someone has been bitten or a dog has been attacked. So I totally agree with you. When I see those kind of things on social media, I say, why? What's that going to achieve?
Yeah.
But coming back to, would you then agree that maybe if someone has come back to us and said basically, the vet said, oh, everything's fine, yeah, for a physical check,
Mhm.
would we then explain to them in more detail, go back to your vet and see if you can get an x-ray done or pain trials, yeah, pain trial meds, or even a scan? Would that be part of your work?
Well, you have to be careful because we can't, unless you're a veterinarian, you can't ethically recommend specific tests, right? Because then we'd be stepping out of our lane or
Mhm.
our boundaries. And in the US, it'd be practicing medicine without a license. So we do have to be careful with what we suggest. Now, of course, sometimes we want to scream like your dog is limping and everybody's saying there's nothing wrong, right? It's quite obvious, and we really want them to do certain diagnostics. But again, we have to be careful with how we say that. It's the same thing as a veterinarian without behavior education, saying things like, you have to go down, you have to take your dog home and dominate them because you're the alpha, and they're giving all this advice that, of course, upsets trainers. So we do have to be careful with what we suggest. However, that being said, we can certainly be an advocate for the dog and advocate in ways that don't cross those boundaries. And one of the things I do is, especially for trainers listening in, it's our job, it's our responsibility really to find those veterinarians we trust that we can send that client to for a second opinion. And so
Mhm.
building that network is really important. It's just like any other professional out there. If you're family doctors and you have something going on orthopedically, maybe you need an ACL repair, something yourself, and you ask for a recommendation. Imagine if your family doctor's like, well, I don't know. Right? I don't know who to send you to. Go yourself. That is, very lacking. So same thing for trainers. I think we should have veterinarians we talk to and reach out to. And it can take time. You have to build your network of trust, but you should have those veterinarians that you trust that know how to look for uh, medical issues or underlying issues that can impact behavior. They don't have to be a board certified veterinary behaviorist, someone that just knows, hey, here's the test I'm going to look for. This dog could be in pain. So what I'll do is tell my clients, I can understand your veterinarian is giving the all clear. However, I do want you to recognize that not all veterinarians specialize in behavior or have a background in behavior, just like human doctors may not have an, work in couples counseling and things like that. And so we rather see a specialist for that. I happen to know Dr. So and so who specializes in this, and I would recommend you tell your veterinarian this veterinarian that I'm recommending you to what's going on specifically so that they can suggest the proper tests. So the other thing I also recommend clients do is get video of whatever they're seeing, not the biting and aggressive responses. It's the other things like, oh, my dog got up slowly from their dog bed, or my dog was running and they were kind of running in a weird angle or something like that. Get that on video because what happens is when you go to the vet's office, a lot of dogs, they either don't have the room to run in the vet's office, or they're not going to exhibit the same behavior because they're in a foreign place. Sometimes it's stressful, so they're suppressing a lot of their behaviors, or they're not exhibiting the same behaviors as they would at home. So get it on video because that can also be really helpful. Yeah, definitely get that network of veterinarians. Don't be afraid to recommend the second opinion. Use that analogy. It works all the time. Just use that analogy. Family doctor, and then you have specialists. So we need to see a specialist for this because it's behavior. And then yeah, get video evidence. Oh, and then the other thing for trainers too is just a short case summary or case report. So 1 page or less, nothing longer, and just a bulletproof like here's what I observed. I noticed Fido getting up more slowly, and Fido also bit somebody when somebody reached for its hind leg. And you make those observations. It's going to give a lot more for the veterinarian to also say, oh, okay, that makes sense. What's going on here? Again, without saying, I think he needs an x-ray or I think he needs this particular blood test, because that's going to be overstepping your boundaries, unless, again, you're in the veterinary field. So, yeah.
It doesn't take much for vets to feel anyone is overstepping the boundaries. In the US, I suppose it's very similar like it is here. However, if you evidence something enough and you can back it up with some form of recording, what we are actually then doing is not forcing, but allowing the vet themselves to dig deeper on what they are seeing, and they start asking why. Yeah. So,
Yes.
yeah, the outcome could be pretty good. It's those that are not, what's the word, getting the right information or enough information, they're more likely here in the UK to just fob you off. Well, not fob you off, that's not the right thing to say, but they don't have enough info, so they can't go any further. But you're absolutely right. It's important that we, as professionals, do things in the right way so we get a better outcome. And collaborating and working together, we need to be professional. So I totally agree with you on that one. But let's look at genetics. Would you say there are some dogs out there, when we look at the aggression field, could be part of their makeup?
You said I missed the first part of the question. Is that some dogs or some standards?
Or some dogs could, genetics be a reason why they are displaying the behaviors we see?
Absolutely. Now, it's important to note that just like Dr. Susan Friedman always says, it's a study of one. So you always look at the individual dog because just because a dog is of a certain breed doesn't mean they're going to exhibit behaviors or tendencies is probably the best word that what we look at for that particular breed standard or what the breed has been selected for. That being said, we do have to consider genetics and what humans have selected for. And I find it interesting the argument that, oh, you can't, aggression isn't necessarily genetic. It's all in the environment. It's all in how you raise them. But then those same arguments are not held up against the arguments like, oh, I've got a great retriever. He goes hunting and he gets great at retrieving things. But aggression's not genetic, and it's an interesting argument because it's what we select for. We've selected for in our breeding practices, and remember, we've selected for uh, particular tasks when we started out as humans breeding and selecting for dogs, and then we got into looks. Right in the last
Mhm.
100 years or less, we've gotten into like, what is this? What do we want for the dogs to look like so they look great under our arm or as we're walking with them, right? And we forgot about all of the working behaviors we've selected for. So, absolutely, some breeds are going to be more likely to exhibit aggressive behaviors in certain contexts in which are similar to what we selected for. That's probably the most succinct answer I can give to that. And and people will have a hard time thinking about that, especially if it's for some breeds that we see a lot of folks wanting to advocate for because of the bad rap they get. And pit bulls are a good example of that. So I get a lot of questions about pit bulls, of course. I think pit bulls are lovely dogs and I think make very suitable pets. That being said, people should be aware of the potential genetic in predisposition in some dogs. Again, not all of the
Mhm.
dogs in the breed, but with
Mhm.
pit bulls, I'm going to be more cognizant if I'm working with a client who has a pit bull with dog-to-dog aggression. And the level of aggression or responses, I should say, the intensity of the responses we might see in some pit bulls is going to be more than some other breeds, simply because we've had a lot of bad actors selecting for that. And so you see those genetics seep into the population, of course, just like we see retrievers or border collies are more likely to herd things, right? It's part of that selection process we've selected for as humans. And so sometimes you'll see a pit bull that's going to bite and hold and shake as part of their bite style, simply because we've selected for that in the breeding. And so obviously unethically in that aspect of what we've selected for. So I do take into account if somebody reaches out to me and they've got, for instance, a Belgian Malinois or a Doberman or a Rottweiler, or, dog, even livestock guardian dogs, or certainly start getting into some of the dogs that you don't see commonly, thankfully, but are still very the genetic pool hasn't been thinned out much, like South African Borbals or Kangles, right? Dogs that we're going to definitely see more likelihood of biting behavior simply again because we've selected for that. So genetics does play a role, just not all the time, and how much we don't know, of course. But it is for me something to be aware of when it comes to the behavior change strategies as well as the safety and management. You just layer that in, just like if you have a large dog, and we're not talking about aggression, and you're talking about loose leash walking, right? You're going to consider that as part of your plan. You got a 140-pound Connie Corso, or you've got a 10-pound Chihuahua, which one's going to probably be more difficult to manage on leash at first when you're first training, and what's going to require different mechanics. As that's the same way I look at it in aggression cases. Like, okay, so you've got a dog that could bite really hard because they're a large dog and a very muscular, head and shape, and we've selected for that. We just have to be more careful with this particular dog if they have a bite history, and that's all I look at. So I never fault the breed. I fault the humans sometimes, right? People being idiots in their breeding practices, but um, I, or I don't even call it practices. They're egregious behavior of breeding, but um, but yeah. So I don't know why it's such a contentious topic sometimes. I think sometimes it's just because people are very defensive about their breeds and they don't want to say, "Oh, it's genetics," but we do have to have some reason in there and some critical thinking too, especially when it comes to the safety of others and other animals. We do have to consider that. So.
Yeah, I for one never rule it out. I don't make it the be all and end all, but I keep it there in the back of my brain just for the time being, because you're right. If we are specifically breeding dogs to retrieve and herd and all these things, and then you mentioned the bobble and you mentioned the gangle. What were they bred for?
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, I keep it at the back of my mind. Yeah, I don't make it a huge topic unless it needs to be part of the conversation. Yeah, so I totally do agree with you there. And then when we look at um, exposure, genetics, puppy going home to new owners. Let's take a Kangal for instance. Yeah, nice in the litter, and then it goes home to the three children, the mum and dad, and the older children, and it's just a hectic household. And the handling is all wrong. It's just too much. Whether it's genetics that play its part at this point, or it's always going to be the environment, whichever way we look at it. Like you said, we got a disaster possibly waiting to happen here. Yeah. So aggression at some point is going to be discussed. How would you deal with that if you were called growling at
You
the
know what?
children?
Since we're on the topic of genetics and we talked about the environment, it does reference, and you have the book behind you, Kim Brophy's work, so Meet Your Dog, and the legs model, so learning, environment, genetics, and self. And it's a good way, especially for clients that are having a hard time understanding why their dog is displaying certain behaviors. You can use that legs model as really a great communication roadmap to help them understand really. So let's say you got the Kangol, right? And there's the genetic aspect. You say, okay, you got a Kangol. You thought it was cute because maybe you saw it on a TV show, but now you've got it in your home. And, typically there's bred to guard livestock. So, so you have that genetic propensity. And the gene pool in Kangals, from my understanding, is not very thin. It's not like German Shepherds in the US where you have all kinds of variations. But so you have the genetic aspect. And then you have the environment there. If you have the people treating it poorly or bad handling and things like that, and then you combine that with the learning experiences. So this dog's learning, okay, people can be a little rough, or these kids can be a little bit handsy or pinch my ear sometimes. So you have all of those things going on, and that's impacting the potential for aggression. And then you have this S, the self of the dog. What if you have underlying pain issues in that dog? So you kind of this four of those legs, right, are creating the perfect storm for an aggressive response. And it's really something that I think it's being talked about a lot more, right? Definitely thanks to Kim's work and how the trainers are really looking at the whole picture rather than this is just a training issue or some leadership issue or something like that. Now we're really digging into understanding dogs. And another aspect that I'm glad we're talking about more as an industry, we're seeing more about is the where we're getting dogs from. So, rescuing from other countries, for instance, is one, but also breeding, how we're getting the dogs in terms of what breeding programs and what we're selecting for, puppy mills in the US, of course. And so that conversation is exciting to me too, because if we when we're talking thinking about why dogs display aggression, a lot has to do with what we're breeding for, right? And where we're getting those dogs from. So whether they're bred by humans intentionally or they're out free living, free roaming dogs, we have to think about that environmental change as well as again where we're getting the dogs and why we're getting the dogs from those locations. In a perfect world for me, breeding would exist at a mass level, but done responsibly. And then we think about less taking dogs out of their natural environments, so which 90% of the dogs in the world or more actually are free living, free roaming dogs. They're not owned by anybody. And so we'll think less about those dogs and saying, hey, these dogs actually aren't living the worst life. We humans think that because we see a dog that doesn't have a home, and that goes against our moral mindset sometimes, or what we believe in. But we think about getting those dogs off the street. And when there's so many dogs that are in other locations that need to be taken out of those environments, meaning shelters or sanctuaries or places where it's just a very stressful environment. And so that's one thing. But then getting back to the breeding is if we start selecting for, instead of looks, we start selecting for dogs that are well adapted to the working the new environment they're in, which is our big city life, our hectic lives, being in a home for 8 hours a day and adapting to those working conditions, just like we did in the past, where we were breeding for a dog that's going to be out in a field, herding sheep, or a dog that's going to be just sitting around and looking to make sure there's no predators coming onto the property. That's what we. That was the previous environment a lot of the world lived in. But now look at our modern society and what dogs have to put up with. And we haven't selected for that. Nobody's really thought, oh, I'm going to breed the perfect apartment dog or a dog that's going to do really well being left alone 8 hours a day and then going out and having to be on leash in the city around all these other loud noises and buses and people riding by on bikes and everybody getting up in their face and wanting to pet them. That's the working that we should be looking at. So if we start selecting for those dogs, saying this dog is really great out in New York City, yeah, I'm not trying to guard my sheep in the home, right? I want this to be able to go to the cafe and be able to go with my dog in these city environments. That's what we should be selecting for because that's what the majority of dogs. But instead, we're still pulling dogs from rural areas where they're living a great life, or we're, breeding them in puppy mills because we like the look of that little short, cute face. And again, if and that would put me out of work. Honestly, if the whole world was just like, let's just actually start selecting for dogs, really nice dogs, and breeding them over and over, because genetics will take the role there, and the working at line aspect of that will be, we could see a guaranteed huge decline in the number of aggression cases because we've thought about um, really the big picture is the welfare of the dogs, saying, okay, let's stop like pulling dogs from these different places where it doesn't make sense to do that. Where are we getting dogs from? Let's get them from where we know they're being selected for, just adapting well. And we know that their welfare, because of what we're selecting for, is going to do well in this environment that we've created as humans in this new world for dogs. Then we're addressing that welfare component, right? Because now we're not sticking the dog in an apartment for 8 hours a day, every single day in New York City. We've selected for a dog that's adapted well to that because of what we've bred for. So, yeah.
You
So
kind
yeah.
of touched on it a little bit there, and it's something
Yeah.
that I get asked a lot on social media. Well, not asked, I get commented a lot on social media from obviously more balanced trainers who will
Mhm.
say the reason we've got more aggression cases now are
Mhm.
because people train like you. And I'm like, well, I don't think it's my fault personally. Do you think it's not me? Do you think that is it that because we've changed the way we're training, or is it the genetics that are coming through now, like you said, with the poor breeding dogs that maybe have, like, say for example, French bulldogs comes to mind, that that
Mhm.
they're in pain constantly, they can't breathe, they've got joint pain, that sort of thing. Is it more because we've created these dogs with other issues, or why do you think that we are seeing a rise in aggression, or are we even seeing a rise?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And I think yeah, I've definitely seen that argument being put out there, death before discomfort and you guys are the reasons that all the dogs are in the shelters now and dying and things like that. And so it's disingenuous, of course, was my belief on that, because we could say the same thing and make it I think we also, when I say we, well, I mean trainers that might not use certain tools, they we can also sound disingenuous. We're like, oh, it's because of all these trainers using these tools that are getting stressing out the dogs, and now they're ending up in shelters. But it's such a it's such a when you think about it, there's like no critical thought behind those statements at all because it doesn't look at all the multitude of other issues that create this glut sort of dogs that are ending up in shelters or supposed increases in aggression cases. Now, to answer, just back up a second, to answer that question, this increase in aggression cases, is it really happening? The jury's still out on that, but if you look statistically, especially at the US, now the CDC was tracking dog bites up until I believe it was 2021, and things changed in the US, as some folks have probably noticed. And so the funding and the tracking of data of dog bites is not as robust as it used to be, nor is it accurate. But at that time, there was no increase in aggression cases or dog bites, and so, in fact, they saw some declines. And I also looked at the statistics around the world, places like Switzerland and many of the countries, South America, and some see have reported an increase. I know in the UK, they some of the statistics I look at were showing us
Mm.
marked increase, and sort of why they had some of the acts that have come out in the UK. So it depends on the part of the world. It depends on which statistics you're looking at. It depends on how they track those statistics, which are most of the time not very accurate and don't paint a true picture because there's a significant underreporting of dog bites. And then you look at the anecdotal comments from trainers and consultants, and a lot of us are saying, "Oh my gosh, we're so much busier." But are we? Is it just more of a public acknowledgement or recognition that there is help out there? And that's sort of like, giving a little credit to Caesar Milan of all things. But his show actually really did a lot in terms of saying, hey, there's people that work with these type of things. It's not take them out in the back and shoot them. That back in the 70s and 80s, they used to say. So okay, so all that being said, to say there's an increase or decrease in aggression cases, it depends where you live, it depends on your experiences, it depends on the statistics. And so, to answer that question, you kind of have to look at your own microcosm to say,
Mm.
okay, it's increasing, decreasing. And I'm sure it is increasing in some areas and decreasing in others, depending on many factors. So let's get into those factors. Breeding, we talked about breeding. That's one of the most common influences I personally feel, and this is just my opinion, but I personally feel that yes, the breeding practices were getting dogs with more health issues, or the Frenchies, or I haven't heard the English bulldogs that are just struggling with pain issues, and so they're just feeling grumpy all the time because we are seeing the breeding just create more and more health issues. So that's part of it. I believe it's also where we're getting dogs from, especially during the pandemic. We saw the shelters get cleared out because everybody wanted to get a dog, but a lot of those dogs were questionable and they weren't supposed to be on the adoption floor, but they were able to clear the shelter. So some of these dogs, we saw some dangerous dogs being adopted out, and I was personally involved with quite a few of those cases and people contacting me for help because this dog shouldn't have been adopted out or it wasn't disclosed. So yes, you might have seen a spike in what people are talking about. However, that spike is also influenced by the severity of the case. So certainly if we hear somebody getting mauled by a dog that was just adopted, that can really influence our brain like, there's this significant increase. Why are the dogs so much more aggressive now? And where that may not be the case. Now, I believe that yes, we might have seen a spike because of the dogs that are questionable shouldn't have been adopted out, but that's just another factor involved. It's like, again, where we're getting the dogs from is influencing this narrative around, okay, we're seeing an increase in aggression cases and it's your fault or it's your fault or it's this trainer's fault, that trainer's fault. So that's another part of it, breeding practices, where we're getting the dogs from. The cultural influences as well. This also, fortunately, again, I can't say how lucky I am to have been able to travel to so many countries and observe. And that's the first thing I do. Say, don't show me the Eiffel Tower. Don't show me the landmarks. Show me where the dogs are. I want to go visit the dogs. I want to see the shelters. I want to see, dogs on the streets. I want to see dogs just interacting with humans because you learn so much about behavior and about how much culture and environment influences the dog's behavior. So if you go to countries like Switzerland or other places where dogs have much more freedom of movement and they can go to the cafes, they can be off leash in places, and there's just so much less restriction. You see so much less aggression in dogs because those dogs have been raised in an environment and probably also get coming from selection processes, which are much more robust. So you're going to see less genetics and less dogs coming with behavior issues already. However, culture and society really, really changes how much you see aggression. Same thing with the street dogs. You see a lot of free roaming dogs in certain countries. And if the environment is not impoverished, meaning they can work the tourists for treats and food and they have plenty of access to garbage and things like that. Again, you don't see the same level of frequency or intensity of aggression, at least in my observations, as you do somewhere in like the United States or the UK, because again of the cultural influences.
Mhm.
So that's another big part of it. Culture and how humans treat dogs. Some cultures the dogs are looked at as dirty animals, and then you see people throwing rocks at the dogs all the time and to get them to go away. And guess what? The dogs start to learn that humans are not safe, and they pass that down. They're like, okay, you must avoid humans. You teach the puppies that. They develop in utero, even like the in utero epigenetics passes along the puppies. So primed to be like, okay, we got to be more worried about the world because of what can happen. And so the culture of the society will actually impact the dog's behavior in the long term, not just in the short term, just in the long term. Um, so culture is another part of it. And so if you step back for a second and be like, okay, in out of all the dogs on the planet and all of the trainers that exist on the planet, how many of us trainers are working with the billion plus dogs that are on the planet, right? It's like such a small percentage. So to blame anybody, any trainer for or training methodology on this is why all the dogs are in the shelter is just foolish because it's just,
Yeah.
okay, maybe 0.0000001% of dogs you see in shelters might have been influenced by a trainer, either from either side or whatever they did. But, take a step back for a second. Just look at the bigger picture. Look at the world of dogs, and that'll tell you um, really what influences aggressive responses. And dogs have had aggressive responses since the dawn of time, right? So we haven't started to suddenly see, oh
It
my
definitely
gosh,
wasn't
I
me
gave the
back
dog a
then.
cookie or I used a clicker, and suddenly now all the dogs are biting. So, or vice versa, I use this particular class. Suddenly all the dogs bite. That's just not, if you take a step back and look at it. I mean, training has been around what, the last, in a serious way, the last 3 decades, maybe 5 decades. Training in any context has been around over the millennia, many millennia of the time dogs have been around. So I think we need some more critical thought in this conversation. Anyway, so long-winded answer, but I'm so glad you asked that, Sam, because it's been top of mind for me for a while. I see those arguments, and I constantly want to jump in, but it's just time consuming,
Yeah.
to make
Save
those
your mental
arguments.
health.
Yeah.
Stay away.
Yeah.
When you just said save your mental health there, Sam, you're absolutely right.
There's only so
Yeah,
much you can
Yeah.
say sometimes. I'm like, I don't think it's me personally, but
Yeah.
I'm also not going to get into a to and fro. Like you said, Michael, there's no point in, no, it's you that's doing it, no, it's you that's doing it. But that's not helping
no,
anyone when you're sort of
Yeah.
to and fro and like that. So
Yeah, there's plenty of trainers that will spend time arguing about that. Leave it up to them. I tend to wade into the waters sometimes. My goal is not to argue with people, but really just to defend the people that might be heavily influenced or impacted. And you talked about our mental health. There are trainers that are new to the field or maybe have been doing it for a while, and they're really being impacted from a mental health standpoint by
yeah,
seeing these or witnessing these arguments. And sometimes they wade into it, and then the behavior from either side can be really step over the lines and be nefarious and egregious. And that's when I wade into the waters is when I do it to protect folks like me that were coming into the industry. I didn't have anybody to say, hey, there's going to be some really nasty people out there. This is how you deal with those conversations, or maybe you should avoid this one, or you should talk about that one. But I think it's important that, um, especially in this day and age of social media, that people do learn how to protect themselves. So it's really one additional skill, not that we don't have enough to learn, as trainers, but it's one additional skill I think that needs to be learned and uh, taught and known about, to be talked about, is saying, hey, this is how you navigate social media. If you're on social media as a trainer, this is how you should learn how to navigate it, just like you learn how to do your accounting and marketing and training, timing, mechanics. Conversations, especially on social media, are a skill. And if that skill's not developed, sometimes it can work really heavily against you and impact your mental health. So, mental health is, the mental health of trainers is really important to me, and it's something that if I can help to protect those people just by jumping in once in a while, just trying to be a little voice of reason or and not take sides. That's I try not to do either. It's important because that we have enough battling and conflict in our
yeah,
industry. So just protecting mental health is crucial. So
and
if you're listening, do that.
I probably see
Take
more
time.
aggression from trainers arguing
Mhm.
on social media than I do
Yes.
from a lot of the dogs. And their aggression is you're just like, wow, that's
Isn't it such
it's
a
okay,
good
go on.
learning opportunity though? Because when when you work with aggression cases, when somebody works with aggression cases, and they do it long enough, they start to really see the dogs for themselves. They start to see these dogs are not that saying that's very popular. They're not trying to give you a hard time. They're having a hard time.
Mm.
And so you start to think through the lens of empathy and compassion for the dogs and understanding and looking at the root cause and motivation for their aggressive responses.
Mm.
And guess what happens? You start to, if you can pull that into your life with people and start to understand that. So when somebody's aggressive to you, it's like if a dog barks at you, right, and you walk into their home, most trainers aren't going to be like, "Oh, I take offense to that. That stupid dog." There are some out there that will, but most of us are learning that okay, it's just the dog's being scared or having a hard time. They're worried about my presence. But so many humans don't do that with other humans,
Mm.
right? So, we sometimes miss taking a step back and why is this person being aggressive towards me? Why are they insulting me or throwing words at me that are, have an aggressive tone or passive aggressive or some form of aggression, right? And I think it's such a valuable lesson when we can take what we know and learn about dogs and apply that to the humans we interact with, especially online. And so, one of the exercises I try to really teach is say, when somebody's being aggressive towards you in a comment, first think just like if they were one of your client's dogs, meaning it's saying, why is this person responding aggressively like this? Are they having a tough day? Is it something I said? Is it their learning, their environment, right? Their what's happened with them from previous trainers that may follow the same methodology as me and they treated them poorly. So now they think I'm going to do the same thing. That
Absolutely.
happens a lot. That
Yeah.
happens so much in our industry is this teams, everybody's got their teams that they have. And if you're on the other team, you're assumed to be coming at somebody with nasty behaviors. And I find that so untrue with the vast majority of trainers. We just see it because the social media algorithms fuel that. We see the controversy. So suddenly we're all thinking, oh my gosh, all these trainers must be bad because we keep seeing it over and over. So if we can take a step back and say, just like the dog that's showing aggressive behaviors, there's humans showing aggressive behaviors. Why? What's going on? Are they in pain? Do they have some trauma? Is it their experiences? And we respond the same way as we would with the dog.
Yeah.
Say, hey, listen, you're probably feeling unsafe here. There's, what can I do for a moment to help you feel unsafe? You don't have to say that. It's in your actions. So how you respond is allowing that person to make the next choice, just like we would with dogs if we're tossing treats at them, right? We throw out that peaceful gesture instead of confrontation. And oftentimes, guess what happens? It's the same thing. You're dissipating or you're reducing the fear or struggles or stress that that person has. And you'd be surprised just how often they respond differently, just
Mm.
like the dogs are like, wait, you're tossing treats at me instead of trying to come into my home, like that kind of thinking. It sounds trivial, but I find it's so important. Once we can look at other humans that way, it changes the whole dynamic. So, and then guess what happens with you as the trainer and navigating these social media conversations? It becomes so much easier, so
Mm.
much less stressful. And yeah, and I think it helps you in your work with your clients as well because confrontation, or what's the word I'm looking for? Conflict resolution is really
Yeah.
it's an important skill to have with your clients as well because you guys know it. You guys see it, your client coming at you with like something they don't agree with or the couples are arguing in front of you, so learning that skills is really important to be an effective trainer and behavior consultant as well. So I think it's just good practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, Michael, it's been an amazing topic, discussion.
No, I could
Um,
talk like this all day. I'm loving
uh,
it.
we really thank you for your time coming on and just talking about snippets, all different snippets of
Mhm.
aggression, instead of going to full blown one specific part of it. I've really enjoyed it, so I just want to say thank you. I'm sure Sam has.
Thank you
Loved it.
both.
Yeah. But, Michael, can you explain what your course is about, how people can access that?
Yeah, sure. So this was born out of, when I was learning about aggression, there were lots of good books and some webinars out there, but not a lot at the time in one comprehensive course. So I kind of had to piece it together. I was reading different books, seeing different short webinars, following some people, and I thought somebody's got to do a course on this, so I might as well try to give it a shot and put something together so it's all in one place. So that's how the Aggression in Dogs Master Course was born. It was just saying, okay, let's get all of these different concepts and ways of enacting safety and management, behavior change and assessment and prognosis, and all the steps you would take in an aggression case. Let's just put it in one place. And so I've done nothing really special other than just organize things in a way that I hope is easy to digest for most people, because people were asking for that. Like, is there one place where I can learn about all these things? So that's what I created. I've certainly nothing. There's no groundbreaking information in the course. All it is just a. What I've done is just broken everything down into steps and shown how I've used it throughout my career. I've lots of cases in there where people can just see step to step all of these concepts being put into place on video. And so I thought, that's what I would do. And so, yeah, the Aggression to Dogs Master Course was born. And it was, I think we're going on about 6 or 7 years now since I created it. Now, I'm also going to be revamping it in the next few months, so adding some updated modules to mostly like things about some of the equipment that's changed over the years and some of the concepts. But yeah, so people can see that at aggressivedog.com and get more information about that, as well as all the other webinars and other experts I like to bring in, because I certainly like to give some love to the folks that have taught me a lot as well.
All I can say is I thoroughly enjoyed it. I still dip in and out of it for bits of information. I think it's extremely useful. And if anyone is truly into behaviour, I'd say go for it. At least go have a look at aggressive.com. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure. Um, you've got to come back at some point where we can go into a little bit deeper topic chat about aggression. So until then, it's goodbye from me, Samantha, and Mike until the next time. Speak soon.